Okay, so now we have session 2 of the TagUI maintainer training. Earlier on in the first part, what we did was to cover through the overall view of the architecture. So in that overview, you understand what is TagUI all about and the key components of TagUI, as well as when you run an automation workflow, whether it's a tag file or it's a URL, what happens? You know, what's the entry point on Linux or Mac on Windows? And from the entry point, broadly speaking, what happens after that to drive all the automation? So what we haven't covered, which we will cover now, will be the details of parsing. Parsing as in P-A-R-S-E. So you pass a input file in human language in 20 over human languages and convert that into JavaScript code to drive all the automation that's going on. That's a big part of TagUI. Then what we also cover after going through the parsing could be some of the JavaScript common functions used to drive TagUI. And then lastly, what we want to cover is how the different integration work together to drive the different sub systems. Okay, so let's go straight to the parsing. Going back to the earlier example, we have a Google search. So let's say we go to a Google search page. I didn't share my screen. Sorry about that. Yeah. So okay, going back to the earlier example, a Google search page. Type Q as let's say open source RPA. Okay, something like that. Then you wait for a few seconds, maybe just 3 seconds, or maybe 3.33 seconds. Then snap page to results.png. Okay, so let's say we go back to here. We run this file again. So I have a TagUI logging file created in the TagUI source folder, and with that file, all the intermediate files would still remain after you run. Without the TagUI logging file, all these intermediate files will be deleted after that, which for most users, these are useless. A user is not going to open your JavaScript file and try to understand the code, and it's not relevant. Yeah, so the default will delete away. But if you have a TagUI logging file, just an empty file will do at the TagUI source folder. It will retain all these intermediate files. You see the JS file, raw file, and the log file. JS being the generated JavaScript, raw file being the TagUI human language code. After expanding out the subflows code. Yeah, in this case, the same because I'm not calling any subflows. Then the log file, which is exactly what you see here. Okay, so if you run in quiet mode, obviously the log file will be blank. You're not going to see any output. So that's something to take note of. Okay, so looking at the JS code, so how does the parsing happen? Just now where we left off is there's a running of TagUI pass command here. So I run TagUI pass command to run on the input flow file, and you pipe it to T command, which is actually capturing all output that's on the screen into a log file. And why there's a -Q is because PHP, when you run from command line without -Q, you might get into some trouble in some instance. For example, you are installing it on the server, you might get into trouble. But with your -Q, you avoid all these problems. Yeah. So anyway, I think PHP, is there a help? The grep -Q. Okay. Oh, I can't pipe it this way. Okay. So anyway, somehow it's not listed here. Yeah, but it's a special command for PHP lah. Basically to trigger it not as a web service but as a command line. Yeah. So that was added. So all this I actually all I didn't know until by trial and error, by natural evolution, I managed to learn this stuff and then get it implemented, and it's just that along the way users report certain issues, then I find a solution and implement it without compromising the needs of the other existing users. Yeah, so we have to be careful when we make a change. We have to see the whole user base as a one group and not see a specific user as a so-called as separate from that main group. Because if we make changes that benefit, let's say 10 users and create a lot of trouble for 9,000 users, then that's generally a bad change.
Not worth it. Exactly, it's not worth it to like for the minor to fix for the bigger.
Yeah. So, but there are some changes that are necessary because, for example, recently there's a newer Mac version. They actually don't have PHP. They remove PHP, so users will have to install PHP manually on their own. What that means is they will get a newer version of PHP, which will run the problem with TagUI because the code base wasn't tested with the latest version of PHP. So for changes like that, unfortunately, need to change, because if we don't change or update TagUI code base, it means that all the Mac users cannot use PHP. Cannot use TagUI anymore.
True.
So that is a necessary evil to change. Although that change might affect existing Windows and Linux users. So the best we can do is to test it carefully, test it completely. I test on my laptop, Ruth tests on her laptop, I test on my Linux server, and so on. So make sure the change works even for other OS other than Mac. That's the best we can do. And hopefully, if there's really a problem, users will feedback so we can get an idea what to further iterate on the fix. But that's the type of necessary change, because by not fixing it, we are actually excluding an entire OS level of Mac users, because eventually all the Mac users will upgrade to the latest version. It's a matter of time, be it 3 months, 1 month, 6 months, 1 year, 2 years. There will come a time where all the Mac that's being sold in the market are using the latest version. Eventually. So that's that's a necessary evil we have to tackle on. And that's a necessary risk we have to take. So okay, so let's look at the PHP UIpass file. Okay, so one thing for Ruth to take note is last time when I created the TagUI framework, right, I just link it to my web page. So I think to do for you would be after your TagUI website is up, right, you're probably going to update the files to point to the TagUI website.
Oh, okay.
I still over here this is my personal homepage over here I still mention about TagUI and that it's now being maintained at AIS Singapore. There's a link to GitHub, there's a link to About. So on the various page I mentioned it's a open source free maintained by AIS Singapore with the homepage for AIS Singapore, but and then so on. But I think it will be more appropriate once the new website is up, all this to point to the new website. That will be better. And the new website has a lot more context and information and examples and like what you created, the snippets code, which here there's nothing. It's just a landing page to link to the GitHub page. That's all. So that will be something to do later. Okay. And okay, so one question you might have would be, you look at some of the source code, like if you look at the TagUI Schoolie integration, you see the code is quite nicely formatted, but you look at this file, TagUI pass and TagUI header, their formatting is a bit unconventional. So what I mean is, it's not following proper indentation. It's actually lumping blocks of code together. Yeah, and this is because of a historical reason. I created all this while I'm on the sabbatical, so I'm using it on a small laptop screen. So I try to maximize the number of lines I can pack in the screen, so I don't have to keep scrolling up and down to write the code. But the downside is it's not readable, right? So there are two workarounds. One would be you can just copy and paste the code in things like this, a PHP beautifier. Once you copy the code here, it will format nicely already. Let's say you copy the whole file, right? Open the whole text file, and then you just copy the whole text file, then you paste the code. For example, here. PHP, let's say you're copying the whole file, then, okay, something like that. Okay. Yeah. Syntax error is, I think, oh, did I copy it from the wrong place? Maybe I think I copied on as part of a function. Okay, let me look at some other block of code. Maybe something like that. I think this is a standalone function. Maybe here. Okay, so when you copy the whole TagUI pass file, right? Same for TagUI header file. There's a link here on how to prettify it. So when you just open a VS Code or what, you copy and paste, you can see a beautified version already. And then it might be easier to read or troubleshoot or debug. Yeah. But other than that, because I use a lot of commands, right, it might not be needed if you can read and understand what the code is trying to do. But if you prefer to get it prettified, then you just copy and paste here. Then after that, you can copy back somewhere to understand the code. Okay, so that's an option. Yeah, and that's also included as part of the header of this file, so you can easily reference. I think there's only these two files that I did never format nicely. Yeah, all the other files in TagUI code base is all proper indentation and so on. Yeah. Okay. So let's look at the TagUI pass code base. Okay. Give me a moment. I'm supposed to drink the detox thing.
Okay, can.
Sorry about that. I forgot to put the tincture stuff inside. So I thought at first I train halfway I can drink, but I need to put that herbal thing inside first. Yeah. Okay. Now, yeah, I can just drink along the way. Okay, so I feel like I'm a factory. I keep like dumping water the last 3 days.
So you're not eating like food?
Minimally mostly drinking fruit juices. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
I was telling my wife, hey, can I have less fruit juice? I want to switch to some solid food. I feel terrible. Yeah, this morning I had some 1-2 slices of bread. Yeah. Okay, so the script starts by checking whether user provide a parameter. So you see that although this pass PHP file, right, is called and used directly by TagUI, you notice that I even include all these error messages inside, right? That somehow doesn't make sense because a user will never be calling TagUI pass command directly, and because a user never call it directly, this would never appear, This should never appear. Yeah, specify the first parameter. It should never appear because it always was have the first parameter. The validation check is already done. So why is this? It's because you see, when you develop a piece of code, a component, if you design it to work just as part of a bigger piece, right? You still will have to. It will still be good practice to include all this as part of the component, because you never know a user or a fellow teammate or you yourself in the future is going to use this part of code in a different way. And if that happens, right, you might get into errors which are not handled. Like maybe down the road, somebody decide to use UIpass to do something else. But without this error checking, you actually can't catch this error. Yeah, that's why I think having these checks will be important. And this one is to check whether you provide a first parameter, and then later on you check whether its extension is correct. It's a doc tag. Yeah. Okay. Then after that, you check whether all these temporary files, can they be open to write? This one is to check for whether it can be readable, the input source files. Yeah, like config file, header file, footer file. If you can't even read, then you'd better throw error first, right? This also by right, it will never show up.
Okay.
Yeah, unless for some obscure reason, user go and delete this file accidentally, or the antivirus scanner somehow accidentally think that this is a virus and delete it, then you'll show up. So this is like a bit of Apple, when they designed their first Apple II or something, right? They make the motherboard inside very beautiful, although the customer cannot see. Yeah, that's because for them is they take pride in what they're doing. So they enjoy building the aesthetics into areas where customers cannot see. For me, it's because for practical reasons, this would be good long-term investment down the road. That if it's used in some other way, it helps to catch error. And catching error is important, because if you don't try to spend some time to catch error on a smaller scale, right, by the time a piece of code is integrated as part of a larger piece of software, it's very hard to catch the error at that level already. You got to spend a lot more time to actually debug to catch the small error that you realize, oh, is that this is a subcomponent in this file. But you have something like this, it helps you to zoom into the error very quickly. Yeah. Then you check for things like whether there's a custom CSV file being defined, data table. If there is, you will load all these custom data table file into an array called repo data. Yeah, for use. So and then this one continue to build on it to check whether there's a object repository being defined here. And then there's a local and global object repository. Local means anything you put in your flow folder, so that the tag file, TagUI local, if it's in your flow folder, any file in tag file inside can access to those objects. Global means you put in your TagUI source folder, so any file running on that computer, right, can have access to those stuff. Then the precedence is important. So let's say you have the same object called username as part of the login page. If you have that defined at your TagUI flow folder, and you have that defined in also the TagUI global folder, so which one would you use? The best practice would be using the local one, not the global one, right? It's more specific to the context of the workflow. So that's why the local one is being loaded first, then the global one is being loaded. So when the parsing engine runs, the first match that it finds will be loaded, which means the local one, if it's there. If cannot find, then never mind. You start to look at the repo data array until it finds it in the global definition. Okay. Then some parameters to track whether it's inside.
So in this case, if there's two like similar ones, then
Sorry, say again?
it'll be overwritten by the global one.
Oh no, if there's a duplicate, right, this array is being loaded in sequence. It doesn't have a fixed array length. So what will happen is you have duplicated records of the same value in the same
okay,
array.
can. Got it.
Yeah, and during the parsing, where let's say I search for, let's say you echo backtick username backtick, right? You scan through from the first record of the array to the last record. And once it finds a match username, you use it. And because here the local one is being loaded first, it should match the local one first.
Oh, okay, got it. Yeah.
So here are some background definition of whether you are inside a code block, whether you're inside a Python block, Vision block, JS block, all this and so on. This is important to let the parsing know the state where you are in and for error checking. Yeah. So let's say you are inside a Python code block, right? Then you'll be sure to make sure each line that you pass, you send to the Python integration and not to the art integration or not to the Casper JS. So this is important. In programming, we call this the state. We need the program to know the state where a user is in, but in this case, it's not really a state of the web page, but it's more of a state of the workflow file for TagUI. You know, at what state are you in? Because it doesn't make sense that you are both in the Python code block and in the JavaScript code block. Right? It just can't happen. you can't be inside for example, a Vision code block for Schoolie. At the same time, you are also inside an R code block. It just doesn't work that way. So if that happens, you better throw some error. Yeah. So so these are all the so-called the housekeeping stuff to make sure things are, you know, glued and working in place. Then things like writing the output header, then appending the TagUI global and TagUI local. So now in this case, you can define a TagUI global JavaScript file and put inside TagUI source folder. And then you can put a TagUI local file, put inside the TagUI folder for the flow. So when you define custom JavaScript function, they will be accessible to the user as part of the TagUI RPA flow. And can you see now there's a difference? Now you're actually loading the global first, then you append the local, the other way around. And that's because by doing this way, right, your local function definition will override the global one with the same as this. It's different from just now the array where you load the local first, then global. Yeah. Then that has a lot to do with the sequence, how the array is accessed and how the functions are accessed. In array, when you access the array, it's from the first record to last record. That's why the first time you have a match, that one will be the value already. That's why local is being loaded first. But for JavaScript functions, right, let's say you define 10 functions, but your function 8 has the same name as your function 1. So your function 8 and below, right, you override the first one already. Yeah, that's why now over here I load the local. If so happen, sorry, I load the global first. So let's say I have a function called get the today's date, for example. So if I define in the global, then in the local I define again, right? The local one will override. So when a user call gets today's date, right, you'll be following what's defined here. Yeah. And that usually is the best practice because your localized definition should have more precedence over the global definition. Yeah. Global is more like you define some things to share across with your team, whereas local is something you define for use on your own. You know? So there's still a layer of separation.
Okay.
So this one is do some additional work where your variables defined at the repository and data table level will be available as variable to use in TagUI. So let's say you have a header called username. Then in TagUI, you can reference username directly. This is a newly added one. In the past, cannot. But now, with this being added, you can do something like you have username, you can say username equals to ABC, for example. Then you have the variable being available. Previously, all this object repository and stuff is only available if you use backtick as part of the TagUI step. Yeah, but anyway, this one means that it's universally accessible. Yeah. And of course, if you have crazy header names that's not valid JavaScript name, then it will be so-called sanitized. Yeah. For example, you have header name that has spaces, then of course it'll be removed to so that it's become valid JavaScript variable names. And the rule for that would be it has to start with either underscore or alphabet, and it can contain alphabet, underscore, and numbers. It cannot start with numbers by the simple fact that if you start with number, right, you can write a equals to 1, right? So if you have a variable that starts with number, then let's say our variable is 3 ABC, or let's say 2. Then how do you know this 2 is a variable name or number? You cannot, you know. So when you have a variable, variable name, it has to be start with a letter. That's the same for many programming languages. Let's say you have A equals 1, B equals to 2, then C equals to A plus B. Okay, so that works. But if you have a variable name called you allow number to be variable name, then you say maybe I'll call this variable 1, and then I assign a value of 3. Then that doesn't make sense, because when you do C equals to 1 plus B, right, you don't know this 1 is it the number 1 or the variable name. Yeah, so that's the reason for programming languages in general why they enforce a variable name must always start with a letter. Yeah, to distinguish between a letter or a number. Okay. Yeah, then this one is writing to the output file. This part here is a recursive function to expand a TagUI subflow. So what do I mean by recursive function? So basically, now it's trying to read the whole raw file, which is this one. So it's trying to read here. Then it's trying to check, as part of your TagUI file, do you have a TagUI step or not? Subflow. So it's checking. This one no need already. I just close first. This one also no need this. Okay, so while not end of the whole, you know, input file, I check whether there's a TagUI step. And how is it checked? It calls a function expand intent. And basically, I read every line and I expand every line that has the TagUI step into all the sublines. Let's say this subflow got 10 lines. What will happen is you replace this thing with line 1, line 2, line 3, ... line 10. Then this whole file will be saved as demo.raw, RAW, before it is passed to JavaScript code. Okay, so and what do we mean by recursive function is that you see expand intent. So the function is just a simple function to check whether it begins with TagUI to mean TagUI step. You check whether the file exists. Of course, if it not exists, you'll give an error. And if it exists, you want to load it and then you return the value, for example. There are certain additional checks to make sure that you are expanding at the right level. Like you see all this expanded intent and indentation. And the reason is because, let's say you have something like this. If some condition that UI subflow, right? So if I expand literally, right, I will get line 1, line 2, line 3, correct? But is this right? No, it's wrong, right? Because your TagUI subflow command is called as part of your if condition. So by right, all the lines here should belong to the if condition and not one line here that everything else outside. So there are provisions like this within here to check for that, to make sure, okay, when the subflow is called, when there's a 1 indentation here, it makes sure all the line 2, line 3 are all in the same as part of the if condition. Then line 10. Like that.
Okay.
Yeah, so now I'm running through the TagUI parsing, so you know in the back end what happens. So whether it's for debugging, whether it's for modifying source code for people who are maintaining a fork, it will be very useful, because once you understand this, you can actually control everything how TagUI behaves. Yeah, for your company, for organization, or for your specific debugging scenario. Okay, so all these are done. Then there's things like tracking the counter, and that's important because why? If we don't track the line number, right, it's hard for user to know where's the error they make. Let's say something like that. I just intentionally add in the typo. So I tell you a demo, what happens? You see, straight away you say cannot understand step. This one, okay. I think this is maybe due to a newer PHP error. Yeah, so this one is I first time come across. Yeah, probably now it doesn't accept now as parameter. So this one is a cosmetic error I need to fix. Yeah, so you'll say it cannot understand the step at line 3. So user go know, oh, I go and look at line 3, and oh, there's a typo here. This is line number is not so important if it's such a small file, but if you imagine it's like a super large file, like 100 lines, the line number will be useful for user, for ourselves to zoom down to the exact line where the error happens. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, this one is a cosmetic error lah, but
all the new PHPs, all the different variables have to be defined.
Yeah, so this one will happen for Mac users. I guess we can leave it aside for now lah. Yeah, because I can imagine quite a number of places where this is done. Yeah, so it will probably be quite a significant fix. Yeah, significant in terms of the place where it will be changed. Yeah, we will see whether more users give this feedback, then we can adjust.
Okay.
Okay, so now okay. Now, so far what we are at is that you go to TagUI pass, you do any prep work for object repository, do any prep work for data table, and then you generate the raw file. Right. So after generating the raw file, it's time to look through the raw file line by line. There's already have all the subflow expanded, and then you try to, for line by line, you convert it into JavaScript code. So that's what's being done here. So the main loop that you have is here. You search for while. Yeah, this is okay, here expand intent. Footer. Okay. Where's the main? Yeah, I need to reorientate myself. There's a main while loop that loop through each line. So just now, where were we? We are at. Okay, here. Session to call other. This is for writing subflow. Yeah, just now we are here to expand it recursively. Why recursively? Because let's say you have a subflow, right? It can still call another subflow, and that subflow can call further subflow. So we want to make sure no matter how heavily nested the subflow is, right, user can still use it that way. Yeah. So that's why we, as part of expand intent, you will see that the expand intent actually calls itself. So when you have a function that calls itself, right, we call it a recursive function because it can call itself repeatedly until it reaches the deepest level, then it start to process and exit back to the top level. Okay.
But that's slow, right?
That's slow? Oh no, it's okay. Because for normal processing CPU today, right? All these are actually negligible in terms of performance. Let's say you write a design in terms of recursive function versus a for loop, you get negligible differences in the time taken. The only exception is, let's say you do a recursive function that loops 1 million times. Let's say a very big count, for example. Then you do a for loop 1 million times. The recursive one is going to take substantially longer because you are building in memory 1 million times of the function call and the variable space. Whereas a for loop one, you don't need to do that. But in this case, can you see that for even a very advanced user, you probably not go to 3-4 levels deep. So essentially that's like a for loop for 3-4 levels, and you recursively go 3-4 levels is negligible. But recursively go 1,000 times, 1 million times is substantial. But in this case, it doesn't. Yeah, it's not likely somebody will have a recursion 1,000 subflow, that kind of structure is insane. It's humanly not manageable. I don't think people have the mental space to actually understand something that have 1,000 layers of stuff. I think I will quit the job if I have to do that. It will drive people crazy. Okay, so just now we're there. The next part will be reading the config file to get some parameters out. So some parameters will be the language. Yeah, actually that's the main parameter we try to get here. And after getting the language, there's a translate intent. Yeah, basically that calls a TagUI translate function. So there's a TagUI translate PHP file. Basically, this file will help to translate the human language in different languages back to English. Yeah, and that's important because the base language that TagUI uses is English. Let's say you write a code in Chinese. What you do is convert line by line the Chinese syntax into English syntax before you do the actual parsing. So this is done here. As for how that is done, right, it's just raw strings manipulation, nothing fanciful. You know, you have an array of input keywords. How you use the dictionary definition, find a match and translate it into the output keywords. That's all. Yeah, but because it is using string manipulation, I think the code is not easy to read. Let's say if I were to read this code now, I have to refer to the comments and try to understand that. I will know what how that is done. Yeah, I cannot tell you, offhand the logic how this works, other than saying, it takes the input dictionary, which is this one. Let me show you. So under the source folder, there's a languages folder. Let's say I have a Chinese dictionary. So basically the translation engine, right, takes the dictionary if you're using Chinese. Then what it does is it finds a match. Let's say you have something like Dianji, you'll find a match and then it convert to click. So it converts the whole line. Let's say you do Dianji ABC, you'll find a match, you'll convert to click ABC. Yeah, you do it line by line, including for if condition and for loop and other conditions. Yeah, all this. You can even write conditions in Chinese also. If this number is greater than, lesser than, yeah, equals to, not equals to, contains, not contains. And all this will be converted back to English. And after converting back, then you do the proper parsing. So you see, the parsing itself, there's a lot of prep work done to, even before you start parsing the line by line. Like you need to cater for subflows, you need to cater for multiple languages, convert back to English. All these are the prep work. Yeah. Okay. Then after all the prep work is done, there's also a need to track the indentation, because you would want to make sure the indentation is measured correctly. And because there's a flexibility for users to use the spaces for indentation or tabs, what what is needed is to actually count when's the first indentation that happened, and then track it as a variable name, so that the next time you know, oh, that means it's one indentation. Then tab again, that's or 4 spaces again, that's the second indentation. The only problem that fails is if user mix spaces and tabs, then we definitely will have problem. Yeah. So so far so good. If there's a need to, we might be required to write some code so that it can work even for spaces and tabs. But I would rather not write something like that to make it work, and rather throw error to the user use a consistent tabs or spaces. Because if we write code that somehow cover up potential errors that user make, and we make an assumption that the logic we use is correct, and then user don't get the feedback that something they coded is wrong, then it has a problem in the long term, because it might start to have a lot of technical debt in their code, which is not working the way they intended to, but they think it's working correctly, or they didn't get any error, so they didn't know there's a problem. Yeah, so that's bad. So it's better to fail fast, let the user know there's a problem, rather than auto fix it for them lah. For this case lah, the indentation. There are some errors in TagUI that they are automatically fixed for them. Like, let's say you have an extra spacing between parameters. All this, you will take care of it for you. Yeah, you assume that user typo extra space between parameters. Yeah, you know. But for number of spaces and tabs, I think user doesn't fix for user. You'll show error. Okay. So there's different parts of code, so that you make sure when you're doing Python code block or different R code block, the indentation where they start is also retained. Yeah. Why is that important? Okay, for example, let's say I have an if condition, py begin, py finish. Okay, so what we want to do here equals 1, b equals 2, c equals a plus b. So what we want to do here is to belong to the scope of if condition. If we don't track that indentation, then when we are trying to pass it, what will happen is we'll be processing it this way. So we basically send to the Python engine something like this. But that's wrong, because you only want to run these 2 lines if the condition is true. But if you process it this way, then this 2 line actually runs anyway, whether the condition true or not. That's why keeping track of the indentation is important lah, and is required. That's what is being done here. And when you detect certain keyword like py finish, then you know, okay, you don't have to track it anymore, because you exit the code block for a Python step, R step. Yeah. As we go through this, you'll realize there's a lot of complexity here. Not to worry lah, just need to know where to find what, and then read through the comments and code. You understand what each part is trying to do. Most of the time, I think for the last few years, there's no need to revisit any of this code. Yeah. And all this code are written like over the past few years. So it's okay not to fully understand what each line of code is doing, but it's more important to know where to start looking and read through the code to understand the part that you need to change or test or debug. And for PHP, how you want to debug is very easy. You just do a print statement, do an echo statement. Let's say you feel like debugging something here, then you just echo testing, then some variable value. Let's say you want to test what's the value of the pattern flow line, then you do something like that. Then PHP to concatenate, right? You use a dot. Yeah. Instead of plus, you use a dot. And if you want your new line character to be handled as a new line, you use double quote. If you do single quote, right, it means a backslash and n. You print out literally your backslash and n. Yeah. So this will be useful for your debugging. You can just add lines inside to test. When you run to this part, right, what's the value of that variable? Is it expected or invalid or wrong or what? So this will be how you debug. So let's say I insert this line here. So I run that the demo file again. I'll get error because it's designed to throw error if okay, you see. So what happened now is as part of my debugging code, each time we run through this code in the parsing, then you show what's the value of that variable. Then I can do whatever debugging needed lah. Yeah, and by default, I designed TagUI such that if during the parsing stage there's any output, right, it means it's an error. So you throw error, it doesn't run. Because by right, if there's no error, all this is there won't be any messages that come out during parsing stage. Yeah, so once you've done your debugging, you just undo back to remove your changes, then you can run again to test. Yeah. Let me see. So let's go to the next part. So because the TagUI code base, when you try to pass into Casper.js source code, it has to be a form where Casper.js and Phantom.js can consume. So there are specific nuances on what is acceptable to a Casper.js JavaScript file. So over here, it does certain parsing so that it converts to the right structure for function definition. So this one, yeah, I think this one, what it does is, let's say you have something like function ABC something. I think in the back end, it converts it into ABC equals to function something. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. So it essentially converts what is acceptable, what is may or may not be acceptable into what is acceptable by Casper.js. Yeah, so I think it checks for this part here. Okay. What else? Okay, so all these are the pre-handling, right? Now this part is the main part that is the parsing. So this is the while loop that actually goes through your raw file line by line and process it. Okay, so this is a part. Yeah, so each line you read, you will get the line and pass the intent and then write it to the TagUI .js file, the source, the target JavaScript file. So after writing, you read the footer and write it to the footer. That's all. Yeah, sometimes there are a bunch of codes to fix a certain bugs that are added in when the user raises a bug. So for some of them, I'll link to the GitHub issue. For many of them, which are more obvious, right, I'll just add a code in, and later on, if you need to check the GitHub issues, you can use the trick I shown the other day. On the GitHub repo, you check the file and you check the blame. From the blame, you can see the history of when something is being added. I think this part was added there to solve the problem of data table iteration. So this part of code was added so that in between iteration, it doesn't make the page blank again and then go to that URL. It stays at the same URL. Yeah, this part of code was added for that. Yeah.
Okay.
So in production code, a lot of times is user encounter problem edge case, we fix, we add a fix. Another user encounter problem, there's an edge case, we add a fix. And given a project that runs long enough, your code base will be a spaghetti lump of code fixes of edge cases. And to a certain extent, it cannot look pretty one. it because you're gonna put a piece of glue to patch something here. You're gonna put a piece of code to patch something there. So in the end, you have all kinds of patches in the end to make something work for everyone. So that's a natural evolution, I feel like, in terms of a piece of software. Yeah, it's not gonna look pretty a lot of times. You can add some structure to it, you can add some comments to it, but a lot of times the things that are being added evolves organically. So if you try to read through it, you might see, hey, why is there a block of code that does this out of the blue? There's no reason for this. Then you realize, oh, actually, because there's a problem with preserving the URL for data table. So this block of code is added just for that. So things like this, yeah, it's part and parcel lah. Yeah, but anyway, as software engineers, we are hired not to enjoy reading beautiful piece of code, but it's to create software that works for users. So it's okay that something doesn't look pretty, but more importantly, it works. Yeah. So then there are other things like do some post-processing, to do some cleanup. For example, this block of code here, a lot of it is to do with JavaScript. Let's say I have something like that: JS begin, JS finish. Then I do A equals to 1, B equals to 2, C equals to A plus B. Without doing a processing like this, right, I'll have one block of code of Casper JS code for each line of A equals to 1, B equals to 2, C equals to A plus B. But by doing this special processing here, I can combine all the consecutive JS steps into one lump of Casper JS code. So let's look at what this means. Okay, so let's say I just do this simple example. There a.tag. Where am I? Here. Oh, I'm in the source folder. Okay. So the generated JavaScript code will be something like this. You see, even a JavaScript code is actually run as part of a Casper JS code block, because the whole engine we are running on is Casper JS. And in the backend, Casper JS run Phantom JS. So there isn't a JavaScript code block that user runs that run outside of Casper JS. That means, right, the user can't, in the TagUI workflow, say A equals to 3 and run it outside of this Casper JS code block. It's all part of the Casper JS domain space. The only way to hijack this is if user use TagUI local or global JS file, or the user hijack and modify TagUI header file to make all these global variables. Otherwise, right, whatever user defines is actually here within the Casper JS the variable space. Yeah. So if there's no cleaning up, what is going to happen is you will get this. Like that. If you literally pass it line by line, you get this. Okay, yeah, you get 3 lines like that. But by having all this cleanup here, you will replace it such that when you find a match of this thing, right, you remove it, because you can see this line and this line actually cancel each other out. The net effect is nothing. So you search and replace to remove this, then like that. Then you search and replace again to remove this part, which is closing the code block and opening again. So at the end, right, the outcome will be like that, a neater version. Then you'll be thinking, hey, this is not visible to user. Why is this important? Okay, and I'll show you why. It's important where you have something not linear, but something like this. Let's say you have an if condition in JavaScript. Then you do A, do B. So imagine you don't have this structure that you combine together. You have a if condition that is the stranded part of a code block in Casper, and then you have your B and C. It doesn't make sense at all. It will just break already because your if condition it does nothing and doesn't end. So there's a need to do this not for just cosmetic reason, but because for JavaScript to be valid, right, you actually need to combine it together. And of course, TagUI will automatically insert all the bracket that's needed in JavaScript. So when it runs, it will become something like that. If you have an if condition, okay. So we can try that. So if true, then A equals to 1, A equals B equals 2, C equals to A plus B. Okay, we try to run that. Got an error. Oh, because this is a JS code. Okay, maybe I shouldn't put as JS because that's I think it's maybe it's because like that. Okay, try run again. Okay, so via a.js. Yeah, so here there's a Casper.js code block which checks if true, then you'll automatically add the open bracket and call a sub block of all the code underneath the if condition. So all these are already taken care of. And it's very challenging because you are trying to convert a human language file into a JavaScript code file that runs, so your JavaScript generated file must be 100% accurate and correct. Otherwise, you'll get error that you can't even compile, can't even run. Yeah, so that's the challenge here, which over time, TagUI has evolved such that, if your syntax is correct, you'll convert accurately to the right JavaScript code. It's a lot of mundane string manipulation, but that's needed to work behind the scene to convert human language to the JavaScript code to run. Yeah. So you just take it as it's a necessary evil to be done by the TagUI engine so that the user doesn't have to write 100 lines of code to do something simple. Even if you use Selenium or Python request package, you are going to write a lot more lines of code to do something that TagUI can do with one line. It's TagUI is as simple as you can get already to let's say writing lines of code to do something. Yeah. But there are still other things that TagUI can't do, like you want to work with array, you work with variables, string manipulation, you still need a lot of JavaScript code to do all this. There's no TagUI step for doing all these things in human language. You cannot say given a string, I want to extract the first 4 characters. You cannot say that in human language to do it. You actually need to write JavaScript code and Google what's the way to extract that. Yeah. So that's the limitation it has. Okay. So now after doing cleaning up, it you see there's a lot of replacement of Casper to Chrome. All the Casper dot something all replaced by Chrome. And it does this if Chrome engine is used. Why? Okay. Now if you that can be answered by looking back at this diagram. So notice that TagUI by default, right? The original design was automate through Casper.js to Phantom.js browser. So whenever I say click something, I'll call a Casper.js click, which calls Phantom.js browser. But if we want to automate Chrome, obviously we cannot call Casper.js click. Otherwise, the instruction will be routed to the Phantom.js browser. So we need to route it to the right Chrome function, which the time I wrote lah. Let's say so TagUI header. So let's say I do a Chrome.click. So instead of routing to Casper.click to click on the Phantom.js headless browser, I need to call chrome.click. You know, instead of Casper.click, I need to call chrome.click to click on the Chrome browser based on the Chrome engine that I wrote. And to do that, an easy way would be to do a string processing to replace everything. Everything that's Casper, everything, right? Just replace with Chrome everything. And that also means that for all the Casper.js function call that interact with PhantomJS web browser, I need to write all the matching code to control Chrome. Which is why in the TagUI header file, you have all this definition, right? Click, scroll into view, get XY, get rectangle, you move the mouse there, you send a key to type something. All these are Casper.js function that exist like
Right, so you just copied the exact name.
yes, exact name, except I change it to Chrome dot something. Yeah, so that it's routed to the right place and not to PhantomJS. Otherwise, if you are automating on Chrome, what for you go and control Phantom to do something? No point, ma.
Yeah.
That's why over here, it only does all this replacement if it detected that from the environment variable that you are using Chrome. And this is set in the TagUI, the entry point when you do the initial, you call the TagUI command. It sets the environment variable there that you are using Chrome. Okay. Then some other stuff like if you detect whether you use computer vision like the keyboard step or clipboard step, mouse XY, or the visual automation, if you detect it, then you want to set a trigger so that TagUI, when it call the as part of the entry point, right, it loads the engine for Schoolie, right? So all these are the keywords to use regex to check whether your TagUI tag file actually contains those keywords. Like clipboard, exist, present, all this. And if it does, you create a dummy file, Schoolie in, for example. And when you go back to the just now, when the entry point, you see TagUI dot Schoolie dot in. TagUI Schoolie. Oh, a typo, sorry. TagUI Schoolie dot in. You see, at the start of the entry point, it delete the file. Then after it deletes the file, it do the parsing. And after parsing, it checks whether the file exists. And it will exist if during the parsing, it was detected that there's actually a calling of those Schoolie-based function. And then you create all this dummy Schoolie in file. And over here, you detect the file is there. Then you load the JavaScript engine, the Schoolie JavaScript engine. Sorry, the Schoolie Java engine is based on Java. So you see it's calling a java.jar and the Schoolie engine. Right? So it's done here, the detection. Then things like checking turbo parameter so that, okay, there's a number of things that have been done in the turbo parameters. First is you enter keys all at one go. Next is you reduce the lag time between TagUI and Chrome. By default, there's a lag time that's introduced, but when the turbo mode is activated, right, you try to reduce the lag time to very small so that you run very fast. Yeah, and some of the things will be computer vision. If you move the mouse, right, you instantly move the mouse to the target location instead of taking 1 second to move there. So all these changes, there can be two ways to do this change. One way will be to configure it as an option. And wherever TagUI is run, there will be a decision making to branch towards whether you want to do it fast, you use this set of settings. You want to do it slow, you use that set of settings. But if you do that, right, you slow down your execution significantly because every step of the way you need to do this check. Yeah. So what I did to implement the turbo mode, right, is this part of code here actually hacks the TagUI code base. It actually changes the code base before you even run the automation. and it adjusts the code base so that it is using the parameter for turbo mode or using the parameter for normal mode. Yeah, by doing it this way, there won't be performance delay because there's only one time all this change is done at the start, but during the execution, each step, right, it doesn't do the decision making anymore. Yeah. Is this confusing at this part?
Okay. I guess when the time comes, then I'll see like what to pick. But yeah, I roughly get it.
Yeah, basically, in programming language, right, as long as you have an option, it means each time the code runs, you need to take additional resource to handle that option, correct? So what this means here is the processing of the option is done right before TagUI run, so that it processes it once, so that when you're running, you don't need to factor in the option anymore. Versus each time you run, right, you check whether you are turbo or normal mode, and then you use a setting whether it's slow or fast for each step. Yeah. So by doing it once at the start, right, each step when it runs, right, you straight away all is fast, straight away all is slow. You know, rather than line by line check whether you want to run fast or run slow, you you could slow things down lah. Yeah. So that was but then things for checking quiet mode. Hide the dummy output. Then convert to test script. You know, if you run with test option, the file structure for Casper.js has a different requirement. So there's further string processing to handle that. Yeah, and this function expand intent, which we covered earlier, to convert the subflow out. Then this is one on passing intent, which is to actually the bulk of the understanding each line and convert it into JavaScript. So how that works is you read the intent, then you try to understand that line, what is the intention. And after understanding what's the intention, you do things like passing the backticks because you want to replace your backtick with the actual value instead of the backtick variable name. Then you handle things like take care of the integration code block. You take care of things like you have an open bracket, close bracket. You have a indentation and return of indentation. All this will be done here, pass intent. Okay. Passing backticks. Basically, passing backticks would be okay. Maybe I repeat again. So for each line of code here, so for each line of code here, it will try to understand the code by running it to a function called get the intent. So for this line, you'll get the intent to return the intention as type. And after getting the intent as type, you send it to the intent, the type intent function to process it accordingly to the right JavaScript code. And that's a part of get intent, and then process intent. Yeah, but as part of all this scanning, right, there's also other things to convert it to the actual value. So let's say you don't have queue, but you don't have open source, for example, you have a query, well, maybe data table, or maybe it's an object repository. So this query over here, it'll be based on the pass backtick, you'll be matched back to the correct variable value. Yeah, and there's a lot of string handling because in JavaScript, if there are certain, let's say you're printing a certain string and then you never escape properly, you get error. So some of this function here is to make sure the escaping is done correctly so that it doesn't throw unnecessary errors. And you have all this problem because we are trying to convert human language into JavaScript code, which is not something that is usually done. So there isn't a so-called engine out there can do it. That's why we got to write the own engine to do that. Yeah, and as part of doing that, you need to handle all these edge cases of the correct JavaScript syntax. And for example, simple things like this. type Q as like that, you'll give error already, because when you generate this to JavaScript code, right, at the back end is something like Casper.js.echo. Let's say your value is like that, right? You write your JavaScript code as something like that, value, okay? Something like this, okay? So when this line get passed into this, right, it shows an echo and type the value. And instead of doing this, the user give this one. Then if you do a special processing, this is actually broken JavaScript code. You'll crash already. So you have to have special handling to convert it intelligently to something like this. So it still is a properly formed JavaScript code. So I can tell you, I had a lot of heart pain and tear out a lot of my hair to deal with this problem in the last few years. It's one of the hardest part to get right. Yeah. So it took a lot of revision to get right. Yeah. In fact, most of the ideas how to make it right was explored when I was doing the Python RPA project on the side in my personal time. Yeah, then I found out some ideas to get it right, and then I implemented here to improve the main TagUI code base. Yeah. So especially for Python 1, there's a lot more challenges because I'm actually calling TagUI code from Python. You actually add another inception layer on top of TagUI. So you imagine this whole thing here, right? Let me show you. It's like the movie Inception. You see this actually has multiple levels of subcomponents, right? Then on top of this multiple level of subcomponent here in TagUI, right? It actually now exists as a subcomponent of this Python programming process. So a lot of all this single quote, double quote stuff, right, becomes very tricky here to get right. So as part of creating this package, I try to solve some of this problem, and I borrowed the ideas to implement to TagUI code base. So now whatever you try to type, right, it's not going to crash your code anymore. Yeah. So all this is being done here. All the escape code, whatever. The passing backtick. You see there's a reference to the repo count, repo data. That's where your repository is stored. And what do you mean by global in PHP, right? Global means you're accessing a global variable and not something within this function. Yeah. Then you also do things like pass your variables, pass your closure, processing intent. So maybe we look at get intent first. So this is get intent. So you see all this raw code just to interpret the different keywords for TagUI and return the intention for that step. After checking everything, you check whether it's an Excel command, whether it's a Word, whether it's PDF, syntax, and lastly, whether it's a JavaScript code. So there's a certain order of doing things. We should check the one that can be specific first. Then we leave the one that's not so specific at the end, in case they are wrong, they're wrongly interpreted. So that's for getting the intent. And after getting the intent, we want to process it. So it's very simple, straightforward. So based on the intent that you return by get intent, right, you call the respective function here to do the passing. So let's say this slide is called www.google.com. Then you return intent is a URL. Then you get the URL intent to pass it. So you do a URL intent, and you do all the business logic behind to convert that demo .text www.google.com into this block of code here, like that. Yeah, all these are the so-called the string processing logic for Casper.js, and nothing more. It's just an ugly block of code to convert from this line, google.com, to this whole block of code. Then same for here. Second line is what type Q as something, right? So your process intent, you do a get intent, and the get intent will tell you, oh, this is a type step. Then you pass on that whole line to process intent. And then your process intent will do the type, return type intent of the value of the whole line. So you pass this whole thing to your, let's say 1, 2, 3, okay? You'll pass this whole thing, type Q as 1, 2, 3, enter to your type intent. So let's look at type intent here. So this whole block of code exists so that you can convert from this one to this one here. And why is there so much code that's needed? Because you need to handle things like whether it's typing just to a web page or typing to a visual automation text box. All these are handled here as part of the code. You see, you'll do a check whether, hey, is this a schoolie parameter? You know, your input, is it the image file? Is it the XY coordinate? That's why there's all this helper function to check whether it's a part of the schoolie engine. If it is, you'll convert the output accordingly that calls the schoolie X engine. And if it doesn't, you call the normal web engine. And things like when there's enter key, you process it differently to call a certain function in a certain way so that you send an enter key. And then it does things like automatically capture screenshot when you get a timeout. Let's say after 10 seconds, you cannot find the text box to click. So you throw error and you get a screenshot so user can see what's going on. Yeah, so because of this, your one step here becomes like so many steps here. Yeah, so then let's look at the wait 3 seconds. So same, you'll pass to become a wait intent. We can jump straight to it because it's the same pattern. So you will convert the wait 3.3 seconds to this block of code here. Yeah, and then by default, 5 seconds lah. So if you are a user or you want to customize for your customer, what the default wait would be, then you can change it here. They change it to default wait. Maybe it's 3 seconds, maybe 1 second. Is really up to you. Yeah. So it's fully hackable. That's something I like about open source. Source code is fully available. Users, consultants, tech leads can do whatever they want with the source code. Yeah. So you can do all this here. And then the snap page to result, and there will be a snap intent here. So the structure is always the same. You check whether it's calling schoolie, and you handle accordingly. If it's not, you handle using a web browser engine, right? So there's an illustration. Let's say I do the different version. Let's say search. Okay, now it's the same thing, but one is doing a search using computer vision, one is using the normal search. So let's say I run this. Let's see how the demo file will look like. It will error out. It may not error out because there's really 1, 2, 3 on the screen. Yeah. Anyway, the execution is not important. What I want to show is the actual generator file. So over here, I don't think this is an updated file. Am I in the right folder? Demo.js, yeah, right folder. How come 456? Okay, here. Here, okay. So you see, the first line, type Q as 1, 2, 3. It gets translated to be here. Now the next line, type search PNG as 456. It gets translated to be this. So it actually handles differently. This one actually Schoolie step is a function in TagUI header where you send an instruction to Schoolie engine. So we have a process for Schoolie to receive instruction for TagUI. That engine we also need to write our own. So there's always something to handle it. So you receive the instruction, then you if you can't find it, then you check whether the file exists. If the file doesn't exist, you throw error, say the file cannot be found or that thing cannot be found on the screen and so on. So it handles differently, right? So that's the snap intent. Then without going through each individual function, that is generally the logic of the different steps. Yeah. And some steps are more complicated, like frame step, pop-up step. So you have the pop-up intent and the frame intent that try to keep tracks of whether you're at the pop-up or you're at the subframe. Yeah. So all this will be handled at the respective intents. Okay. If you ask me to explain the code right now, right, a lot of it I still need to read on the comments and to understand the context, because a lot of this code I wrote 4 or 5 years ago. So without the comments, without understanding the logic, it's also hard for me to exactly tell you to the pinpoint detail what each line is doing. Yeah. But on the functional level, off the back of my head, I can tell you what those function means. Then let's say over here, you ask me, hey, out of the blue, you ask me, hey, what this line is trying to do. Then I need to actually spend maybe 30 seconds to read through this whole function to understand what that line is trying to do. Yeah. So same for you. You try to troubleshoot. This is where you can add in your code to do troubleshooting. Let's say you have a type intent, right? And you realize you want to do some troubleshooting here, then same, just do it the PHP way. Echo parameters, because that's your input. Let's say here, so maybe you want to check your parameter 1. So you echo parameter 1 and then parameter 2. Maybe you want to add a comma in between them. Then you want to add a new line after them. Okay, so we try to run the same thing again. You should not run because you have error. Then you can see our parameter 1 is Q2 is this. So you can do your debugging here. Or your refactoring or changing the code to let it run the way you want here. So after you're done, you just undo everything and then restore it back. So these are the different type of intents. So just now we are at process intent. So after processing intent, right, it actually runs through line by line until end of the line. So once this is done, you will have the generated JavaScript file ready to rerun, and then TagUI start running. Yeah, so some of the things you see here, like begin TX, NTX, is because there are common code that's needed as part of these things, like to check whether those element exists, to check whether if it not exist, you throw error. So I create a common function so I can call it to generate all these header and the start of this code block and the end of this code block. Yeah. Then there's also special code block to handle end of the frame. There's special functions to check whether something is a XY coordinate, whether something is a Schoolie parameter. Then if it does, you call the Schoolie function to create out the step. Then if it's a R function, you call the R function to create the step, call PY function, and so on. Yeah, so that's basically the gist of TagUI pass. Another part about TagUI pass that's quite substantial will be here. there's this function called pass logic in TagUI pass. It's actually a large block of code. Because in here, it's where you define all the human language syntax for processing logic. You see, you have all these things like more than or equals to, you replace it with the correct JavaScript syntax. Higher than, so all this, if you are writing in Chinese or other languages, you'll be converted to English first as a base language. Then you'll convert all this to your JavaScript code. At the end of the day, right, in your demo.js, there is no human language code inside at all. Makes sense, right? It cannot be you have human language code, you go and throw to Casper, it actually work, cannot. So every single trace of the human language code has to be converted to fully formed JavaScript code first. Then it runs. Actually, I can tell you, after I talk non-stop for 1.5 hours, right, I feel that the topic is very dry. I also feel very bored about what I'm talking about, to be honest.
I think, yeah, roughly we get it.
Yeah.
When the time comes, then like, if we got something to fix, then we will actually really get it. Like, because if not, it's just like not diving into the code to do anything. So it's just, yeah.
Yeah.
To understand like that.
Yeah, and I can tell you how I can live through the boredom of writing all these, right? Is because all these are done over a long period of time. And I mean, I have a certain goal that I have a wish to create this. So when I was on the sabbatical, I write all this because I'm really genuinely excited and interested to be able to convert this human language code into JavaScript code. So because of that, I have the motivation to do it. But if you ask me now whether I'm motivated to write something like this again, I think I cannot do it. It's too difficult and it's too boring, to try to rewrite something like that again. But at the time when I'm on a sabbatical, when I don't have other burdens of life, like, oh, I have a screaming baby in the background, I got so many things to think about. At the time, it's just me and my wife, and I have all the day to go to the co-working space to write all this code. I have all the space to work late into the night even in Chiang Mai, like 3-4 a.m. I was still at the co-working space. I finished and returned back to the Airbnb. The next day morning, I go to the co-working space again to work. I have all this freedom to just dive deep down to write all this, so I can do it at a time. But if you ask me at the context of where I am now, I can't do it, because even before I write the next blog code, maybe a baby needs me and so on. So it's really very hard to do it now. Yeah, but at the time, I have the freedom to, because I was not reporting to anybody. I was just working because of my interest to create it. So it's a sort of a self-motivation to do it lah. And nobody is rushing me, pushing me to get it done. I just do at my own pace, although I work quite hard and work quite late lah, those times. So I managed to get it out lah, and managed to get it working. But if I look back, it's really not easy. And even now, as I try to walk you guys through the code, I'm like, oh my God.
Unbelievable that you went through so much.
Yeah.
It's a nightmare, to even write all this code is like a nightmare.
Like the equals to those trying to convert it from human language.
Can you imagine writing all these to convert the human language into JavaScript syntax? Wow. I mean, if even if you pay me to do it now, I may not want to do it. It's too mind-numbing to write all these things. Yeah, but at that time, I can, because there wasn't it was a period of my life I can explore all these things creatively without a timeline, without somebody to report to, and I just do it at my own pace. If I find it too stressful or too boring, I just take a break to work on some other parts of the code base first, then I come back to it, for example. So
maybe because like the target audience demographic, or like not really demographics, like the profile changed a bit. I feel that last time in the past, like nobody really, like there's a segregation between like a non-coder and a coder. So like the non-coder will feel like, oh, the coders are like hard to attain, or like they went through some training, or but now like there's a lot of people want to go into coding. So there's a shift from like being reluctant to pick up coding language to embracing coding. So they may want to, instead of using all these like human language, they may be more open to using like code language, I feel.
Yeah, lor.
Yeah, true.
So that's why the Python package, RPA package, has more users now lah. Every new users every month. But the human language version is catching up. Actually, the yesterday on the call with Kelly, I think you got to run for another meeting. I was looking at the download stats, and I found that last month, right, actually the human language version takes up 45% of the total new downloads. So that's very impressive. I think a large part has to do with the TagUI course that you created. It actually helps bridge the gap for a lot of people. Yeah. Because other than that, we never do any special marketing around the human language version. It's just the usual user sharing what they've done. I think the cost is probably the main marketing event that driving new users into this tool. Yeah. But that's good, and I look forward to the human language version users exceeding the Python user, because I don't think in the company everyone will eventually learn Python. Yeah, but everyone definitely can understand some basic human language syntax for RPA, and hack something together to get some of the repetitive work automated lah. That's more doable than picking up Python. Yeah, for the most people in the organization. Yeah, like let's say for example, you look at our HR team. It's easier for me to visualize a future where they can actually make use of some of these human language RPA than actually learning Python to do automation in Python. For them, it will be the barrier is still too large. Yeah, but for many people, they are now opening up to learning programming. So for them, they will pick up Python.
That's true. Yeah.
Okay, so what I've shown is the parsing. The last 1.5 hours, mostly I talk about the parsing. Yeah. Right now, I want to go. Any questions before I go to the next part?
No.
Okay. All right. So the next part will be the TagUI header file. So a large part of the TagUI header file would be, there are generally two things in the TagUI header file. One would be the supporting function to click on Chrome and so on. Save text, write text, take a screenshot, save a table. All these are pretty self-explanatory. The other part would be whatever that's done in TagUI pass to do the parsing is actually duplicated in TagUI header. Why? Okay, now I will illustrate why. So let's say you have this same demo file. Okay, let's say you have something like this. So can you see that so far everything here from line 1 to 4 is all handled by TagUI pass.php?
Yeah.
Okay. So let's say I out of the blue I insert a live step here. So what happens when you enter live step? Is the PHP TagUI pass process still running? No, right?
No.
You already finished. That's why you can have a JavaScript file to run. So by the time you reach this line, there's no more PHP process. The only process that's running is the JavaScript engine process from Phantom.js. So in the live mode, if I do the same thing again, let's say I enter live mode then I do type Q as 1, 2, 3. Is there a PHP process that I can run to convert into JavaScript code and return back to the JavaScript engine to run? No, don't have. Which is why in TagUI pass, every logic on the get intent, then you process intent, right? Everything is replicated to the header one for the purpose of handling live mode, right? So the same thing. So let's say we can do this by an example. So let's say we do something like this. Maybe we straight away go to live mode, save some time, right? True. Okay, now we are in live mode. So the only process that's running now is entry point for the TagUI command and the Chrome integration engine and the Phantom.js JavaScript engine, which is the main driver for what we are seeing now. So when I do type Q, or let's say I go to google.com, what actually converts it into instructions to go to Google, right? So we can take a look at demo.js. So whenever we have a live step, that is converted to where is the why is it? Let me see. Oh, they haven't overwritten yet. Okay, so whenever we have a live step, it's converted to this block of code in the JavaScript file where it says live mode type done to quit, and you try to read a line, and after reading a line, you try to do a TagUI pass, which is a function in the live step in the TagUI header. So what happened is you actually have a TagUI pass here. That does the same thing as TagUI pass. You know, you do a translation. There's also a translation engine duplicated here. And you translate from human language for whatever language to English. And after that, you try to get the intent. Then after getting the intent, you do you pass the you process the intent. You see, pass intent, which is a combination of getting the intent and then processing it based on what is the intent. So when I key in google.com, you go through here and you go through here to detect there is a get the URL intent. Then you go the URL intent to generate the code. And the code that's generated will be this. So over here, when I say google.com, it actually returns this block of string back to here. You notice there's an eval here. Eval in JavaScript means evaluate this JavaScript code, this string as JavaScript code. So it returns this string called this evaluate blah, 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 blah to go to the URL. And then eval will evaluate that. And then you go to Google, right? So that means whatever you have in TagUI pass, the logic for getting intent, process intent, it'll be duplicated here. Whatever you have in translate.php to convert from human language to JavaScript code, from human language in third language to English, because English is a base language, it'll be duplicated here as well. So I can show you translate. There's a translate function here just to do that. Yeah. So I can tell you I spent a lot of time just to migrate all this. By the way, there's a function called XPS, X Path Selector 666. Previously, it was called X, but when we introduce XY coordinate, I realized many users might define a variable called X and you'll get error. So I rename it X Path Selector, and 666 is I think it's a unique ID. Yeah. That nobody's gonna rename a function 666, out of the blue. Yeah, that's why. And it's nothing to do with the Bible, where 666 is an anti-God or anti-Christ. Nothing to do with that. It's more of it's a unique number lah. Yeah, and it's more of saying, okay, this tool is an option compared to the other commercial RPA tools. Yeah, so this is an option for users to choose. Yeah, but so you see this unique identifier here. So anyway, so I spent a lot of time to convert all the logic in TagUI pass over to TagUI header, because I think that was in 2007, somewhere in 2017. Yeah, because to me, having a live mode is so critically important that it's worth the time to do it. Because in live mode, you can literally do all the testing and iteration. Let's say you have a 100-line workflow file, right? With the live mode, you can actually debug at the point where you want to, rather than you run your 99 lines just to check the 100 line. If the 100 line is wrong, you got to redo everything. That's just stupid. You're just wasting your users' time. So cannot. So because there's a strong need for this use case, I'm willing to dedicate a lot of time just to make it work. I think I spent a few weeks on this to make it work. Yeah, and the good thing is it did work. The bad thing is in terms of software engineering practices, right? That's bad because you're actually duplicating the 2 blocks of code in 2 places. But because of legacy reasons, the PHP engine is used to convert the human language to JavaScript code. And the JavaScript engine is used in the live mode, right? Because of this legacy reason, then you have this, unfortunately, not best practice, but it's a practice that works for this situation in the best way. Yeah, but the con will be you need more time to write that part of code out. And whenever there's a change in a TagUI pass, you need to map the same change to TagUI header. Same for user. If the user want to hack a functionality in TagUI passing, it's right. He or she should also make that same change in TagUI header, so that in the live mode, you test. Obviously, you want the live mode, the behavior to match your normal, execution mode, so you can test and replicate issues and so on. Yeah. So you will want to keep them in sync. Yeah. But the good thing is, after this has been implemented, there's very little change that's needed. Yeah. Usually, all the change are around other things rather than hacking a function to make it work because it start to fail. That has rarely happened. Yeah. So after the initial investment to write it out, fortunately, so far, there's no need to rewrite anything again. Yeah. But if I look back, whether I will do it this way, maybe not. Maybe I'll choose to get rid of PHP altogether, but at the expense of a slower startup time. Because if I don't have PHP, the one that's doing all the parsing will be in JavaScript. Then it means I need to load Phantom.js into memory first before I can process. And that will add a certain level of overhead. But if you really want it to be fast, then PHP would do the parsing very fast, very quickly. Yeah. So I'm not sure if I were to do it again, whether I will rewrite everything in JavaScript only or still stick with PHP. It's hard to say. Yeah. I guess it depends a lot on the context of the environment. If I still want to optimize the execution speed, probably I will, if I were to do it again, I'll probably write the whole TagUI engine in Python. Yeah. If I were to do it. Yeah, that is probably the best thing that makes sense. But I wrote this in 2016. So at that time, it's still hard to try to write everything in Python, I think. Because I need to replicate the Phantom.js engine. All this is actually a lot of work. Yeah. But let's say I were to do it again and resource is not so much of a constraint, right? I think I will write from the ground up in Python. TagUI. Yeah. Given that I know on benefit of hindsight that Python is the primary programming languages that new beginners try to learn now, given that I know Python is quite a robust ecosystem, probably it makes sense to write everything in pure Python. Yeah, that's what I would do. Yeah, but this is has been done for historical reason. To make a move that way now has a lot of cost, because let's say I rewrite this whole block of code based to Python, right? it's going to take months and months to iron out all the edge cases to make sure it works. It's not so straightforward to actually map the whole translation and code directly to Python. There's more to it that actually when you push it, you release it to the user's hands, then you know what are the errors that happen. But I would rather because if I write in Python, right, I can actually don't need JavaScript, PHP, batch file, shell, and everything can be in Python already. Yeah, you can simplify things a lot. Yeah, but except C# is still needed because the Word and the Excel plugin are based on the Microsoft Visual Studio framework. So that one you cannot run away. But the rest, I believe everything can be reduced down to one language, Python. Yeah. So anyway, that's for in benefit of hindsight lah. In practice, things are hardly done in the perfect way. It's done based on the context, which at the point the decision is made, what's the choices available, and we try to make the best choice lah, given how far we can look ahead.
Yeah, agree.
Okay. So for example, if I were to code it in Python at the time in 2016 and 17, right, what is likely to happen is by late 2017, I don't actually have a working version of TagUI yet. And at that time, if I met Lawrence when I don't have a working version, right, I might not even end up working for AI Singapore, because that working version is the justification for him to hire me to continue to work on it. I have something to show already. You have something that is still half done, right? I can't even have version 1 because I choose to code all the engine in Python, right? A much more work. Then the project might be killed prematurely, for example. Yeah. So to have a project that I would say is an imperfect architecture, imperfect because if you design everything from scratch again, you probably can do it more elegantly, probably can do it more in a more simplified way in one language. Yeah. But although it's imperfect, it's better to have that imperfect architecture and imperfect tool in terms of how it's running the components. It's better to have that rather than have a perfect tool that's not released to the market because your perfect tool will never land in your user's hands. Then there's no point. It's all in your dream. It doesn't actually create real value. Yeah. So for me, I always choose the first case. Yeah. It's great to have imperfection, but you actually deliver value. You empower your users, even with an imperfect tool. It's still better than try to aim for a technically more perfect and more refined tool, but it didn't make it to the user's hands. Then that's not good. Yeah.
Yeah, correct.
So okay, so that's the live mode. So that's if you understand TagUI pass, right, then you would understand broadly what TagUI header is doing. The only part that I didn't cover would be the actual clicking and typing. So let me show you what that means. So let's say I do this part, type Q as 1, 2, 3. So that will be mapped to send keys from the get intent and process intent. So what happens at send key? So basically, there's a Chrome function called Chrome step to send instructions to Chrome. So I wrote the other side of the engine where it receives instruction. So this is the engine from TagUI side to send the instruction over. So I'll call TagUI step to send all this instruction over. I first highlight and move the mouse to the text box, then I type into it, and then I trigger some other external event that could happen because of the typing. Yeah, so then what would be Chrome step? So if you search Chrome step, it is nothing more than trying to write the input instruction to a text file called TagUI Chrome.input. And then the TagUI Chrome engine, the other side will pick it up and send it to the Chrome browser through the WebSocket connection. After getting the output, you write it to the output file, and then TagUI reads it back to see whether successful or fail. So that is what happened when you see this Chrome log. Yeah, so this is basically the TagUI in and out log, but the log, you log both the in and out, so it's good for reference purpose. So this will be the in, this will be the out, then this will be written to the in file, this will be written to a log out file, and each time all these are done, it will be logged to the TagUI Chrome log. It's the same for the other integrations like Schooly, the other integrations like Python, and so on. And there's always a unique ID to make sure everything is done in a sequential way and no single instruction from TagUI is lost to be sent to Chrome. That's very important. Yeah. In software engineering, reliability is the #1 thing to get right, because then if is it reliable, you talk about whether you can do it faster, you can do it better in terms of the design or whatever. Because if you have a software that's very fast, but half the time is wrong, that's not good. You have to need to first have a software, in this case, that's right all the time. Then you try to make it, can it be faster or not? Yeah. But in this case, even then, I don't design it by default to run it the fastest, because there are actually intentional delay included to slow it down to the human speed. Because if you do it the fastest way, then your websites are not designed to be consumed by robots. So you are going to end up to have more trouble in the long term, like breaking your rate limit, account get blocked. LinkedIn, Facebook, they are very well known for that. So in order to avoid all this trouble, on behalf of the user, the decision was made for them to slow things down so that it becomes like a human speed. Yeah. So that's the reason for the intentional slowdown. So sometimes doesn't mean doing it in the fastest way is the best. Sometimes to do it in a slower way actually makes sense in the overall contextual constraint that we have, which is to mimic a human behavior on the applications, right? In terms of RPA. So maybe now is a good time to talk about, let's say, the Chrome engine. How would the Chrome engine on the other side looks like? It's nothing more than calling a WebSocket connection, setting a delay between each communication messaging, sending the instructions to Chrome, removing some junk, So you see, the integration engine for Chrome here for the sending instruction is very simple. The real bulk of the code, right, is actually inside TagUI header, where for each step that I want to do with Chrome, what's the business logic, behind it? You type something, click something. Let's say I do a Chrome.click, right? So it does a scroll into view, it does a mouse move event and so on. So we look at the mouse event. Yeah. So a mouse move event will scroll into view, get the position out based on the selector, then send a mouse action here. So then what's a mouse action? You'll be doing this. Actually, at the end, sending a Chrome step function call of this event to here. So the bulk of the code for the Chrome integration is not the engine receiving the command. It's actually what to send to Chrome. And for this, right, we need to refer to the Chrome Dev Tools protocol. So that is the fundamental language to control Chrome. So when you look at this, then you can check what are the various functions in the Dev Tools protocol. So example, input dispatch mouse event, right? So I go to input dispatch mouse event. So this will be the method to call. What are the parameters? What are the optional parameters. So when I was creating this integration for Chrome, what I did was basically keep reading this document to find out how to enter something, how to type something, how to click something, and then code it out and write the so-called the logic out. And of course, users are free to modify this. They can, if they maintain the fork version, they can modify the behavior to change it to behave in a certain way if they want. Yeah. Then some of the other things in TagUI header would be because you notice that the communication between TagUI and Chrome is in a text file. So if I want to do a screenshot, how I get the data back, right? So the data is actually first this way. First is actually being stored as a base 64 code. Base 64 means from 0 to 9, A to F. So if it's stored as a base 64, uppercase and lowercase, is it ABC also? I can't remember. I need to check. Wait, base 64. I haven't touched this for a while. Yeah, basically base 64, 0, A, B, C all the way to Z, uppercase, lowercase, then 0 to 9, and plus and slash. So this forms the base 64 code set, which means, right, if you have a piece of binary data, you can actually convert it to base 64 pure string to send back to TagUI. And then I have to write the function to convert that base 64 back to binary and save, for example. So that's how things like doing a snapshot of a page will happen. Okay. I think now would be a good
there's a function to immediately convert, right? In JavaScript.
Say again.
There's a function in JavaScript to convert, right? Base 64.
Yeah, I think there is B to A or A to B, is it?
Yeah, because I recently used it.
So convert base 64 to binary string. Yeah, so if I'm not mistaken, right, you can even do away with this function, right, and replace by B to A, I think. Yeah, whether that can be done is PhantomJS JavaScript, I'm not sure, because the PhantomJS one is a bit old, but it might be possible. Yeah. So,
right. Okay.
So you're right. It might be possible. So at that time when I designed this, right, I might have an oversight to miss out using the built-in function if there is lah. This one definitely in the current JavaScript.
Quite new, I'm not sure when it came out.
Yeah. So yeah, so it might be something new that's not in the PhantomJS JS engine. Yeah, but if it is, right, in theory, you can actually do away with this function and replace with that B to A.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Do you need to chow soon? Because it's like 3:30.
Yeah, so I think that's a good point. Okay, so any questions? I think what we covered would be in this session the parsing as well as TagUI header. Yeah, I think what's left would be integrations lah, the various integrations, namely this computer vision for schooling, keyboard automation, Python, R. That we can cover next week lah.
Okay.
Yeah, but before we wrap up, any questions?
Hello.
Can lah.
Yeah. Okay, if you fix a bug, right, then you have to change the version also, right?
Yes.
Like every time you fix some.
Yes. So every time you fix a bug, whether it's anywhere of the code base, right? The two things to change would be you change the
version number.
This one, yeah, to 109, for example. And then you've got to change not just this file, you've got to change the one for Windows also and then Linux.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Then right now, I also changed one more part. I changed the README so that user know there's a new version here. Download. Hey, I forgot to update. Sorry, I think the last few minor change I forgot to update. By right, I should change this to 108. Yeah, so user know there's a new version. Yeah, I'll do that after this. So this one needs to be changed. Then by changing that, right, when user run TagUI update or run the word plugin update button, you will compare with the version inside the TagUI and TagUI command. And if it's different, you will do the download.
Okay, yeah, got it. Can.
Yeah. So yeah, so what I shared, right, will certainly be confusing in some ways, but when you need to troubleshoot errors and debug, right, that's where you can zoom in to understand more. Yeah.
Okay, can. Got it.
Okay, so yeah, the last part we'll have integration. So I'll continue to schedule it to, let's say, next Friday, 10 to 12 for the next 3 Fridays. Yeah. Okay. All right. Head to office and see you guys next week. If there's anything, just ping me on Google Chat or what. Next week I'll still be joining the BRICS meeting and the
Your email not gonna get disabled, right?
I still running until end of the month. Yeah. I'm just clearing leave from next week onwards.
I see.
Yeah. Then yeah, I think I will send a file note at the end, yeah, with my personal email.
Okay.
All right, I'll stop sharing and stop recording.